Hey, good afternoon, everyone. This is Wing Lam. Welcome to this webinar session on strategic account management. I'm dialing in from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia today, and I want to give you a warm welcome for attending this particular webinar session. This webinar session is connected with a program that I run, strategic account management. Basically, it's a program that where we focus really on business relationships and how to build business relationships. It's a very, very interesting area, and what I want to do in this particular session is just to give you a flavor of the kinds of concepts and topics that we cover in this particular program. So as I said, this is just a short overview of the topic, and hopefully it's going to be useful to you. So I'll basically present for maybe 45, 50 minutes, and I'll leave 10 minutes, 10, 15 minutes at the end for any kind of questions that you may ask. So I'll also turn off the video because the video consumes a bit of bandwidth, and I just want to make sure that the session goes as smoothly as possible. Okay, there we go. So just by way of introduction, this is me. My areas of interest from both academic and from a consulting side is basically in the areas of leadership, outsourcing, and strategy. I'm a computer scientist by training, finished my PhD at King's College, which is part of the University of London in the UK. Academically, I've published in a number of different journals and places. I do have a strong focus on the IT industry. And, you know, if you're part of the IT industry, you'll know that building relationships with clients is pretty crucial, particularly when you have large multi-million-dollar projects. You have a lot of you have a lot of high-value consulting projects. Actually understanding how to build effective business relationships, how to work with different clients is actually quite crucial. And I did spend some of my early years with Accenture, Logica, and ICL, which is now part of Fujitsu. Yeah, so that's basically an overview of myself, just to give you some context there. So I just want to picture. This is the tale of two fishermen. So here's the first fisherman, and there he is with his net. Basically, he's at the riverside, and he's got his net out, and he's basically putting his net in the water, and you know, hoping to catch whatever fish happen to be passing by at the time. And you know, that's his approach to fishing. Now here's the other guy. So this guy is a lot more rigorous and scientific in his approach. He's actually in a boat because he's worked out the best spot to fish. He's got his timing right because he's worked out when the fish actually pass by. He's gone out to the right spot in the river. He's got the right utensils, if you like, the right equipment, the right rods, and the right bait. And that's his approach to fishing. Now, which of these guys do you think is going to be more successful as a fisherman, one or two? You can type in a response in the chat box if you wish, but I think the answer is fairly obvious here. You know, so the guy, number two, the guy who's taking that much more methodical approach is going to be a lot more effective in his fishing outcomes. And that's an interesting analogy for business development, because it's really how strategic account management came about. You know, with strategic account management, you really focus on the accounts that matter. and you really try and work on those accounts in a rigorous, very directed way, a very purposeful way, and you'll get better outcomes from a business development perspective doing that. Just to share with you some examples from myself, when I worked for Accenture in the UK, I was based out of London. I was in the area of financial services. So typically our clients would be banks and building societies and other financial institutions. We would focus on strategic accounts, pretty much as a regular part of how we did business. In fact, we actually wouldn't even talk to a potential client unless there was a kind of deal size that was going to be worth £1 million. So typically our strategic clients, our most important clients, were clients that were, had a deal value, if you like, in the region of £50 million or above. And that's how we categorized and qualified our accounts. So actually, the whole structure of business development was organized around focusing on particular key or strategic accounts. So that's really the message that I want to get across. So just a quick question that I'll ask to the audience here. How many of you have direct, frequent interaction with clients? So how many of you actually connect with clients as part of your daily job? Just give a yes or no answer in the chat box. Yeah, okay. So I think most of you, yeah. And how many of you are involved in managing client relationships? Okay, this is actually not a trick question, because if you have any interaction with a client at all, then you are, in effect, involved in managing the client relationship, yeah. These two things are actually part of the same activity. Anytime you have any contact with a client, you are inherently and implicitly part of the client relationship management activity. Even when I was working the junior consultants, we had consultants at multiple levels. Obviously, at the top level, we had a partner, a senior partner, and we had junior consultants at the other end. Even if you're a junior consultant, when you go to a client, when you interact with a client, when you visit a client site, you are actually promoting, selling the services of the company, of the organization. You are part of that relationship development activity. So it doesn't matter who you are. If you have some engagement with a client, you are part of that activity. And actually, even though it sounds obvious, you really have to be conscious of this. Yeah, what I say sounds obvious, but if you really think about it, you don't realize that it's happening. Now, just to kind of qualify a few things here, business development is, it is a kind of real-world, hands-on, practical activity. I'm sure a lot of you on this webinar session have had lots of very good experiences with business development, building client relationships. I'm sure that a lot of you have developed this competency over a long period of time interacting with various clients. And that's incredibly good experience. There's probably not much that I can kind of teach you on the ground about that. But what we do in this program is we try and present some overarching concepts and models and frameworks. And what we find is that does reinforce and it does help you enhance your own thinking skills when it comes to a lot of the applied stuff. So I appreciate that a lot of you have a lot of business development. I'm sure a lot of you have more experience than myself. So even with that, you'll find that this program is quite, adds a lot of insight and value, particularly as we use a lot of case studies, basically. So I just want to ask you another set of questions. This is what I call the SAM test. Sam is strategic account management. It's just a little fun way for me to understand how deeply you're involved in strategic account management. So here goes. Okay, don't type in the answer. Just kind of reflect on these questions. Which are the top 3 strategic accounts in your company? How much of the company's overall revenue is derived from its top 10 accounts? Just a rough kind of answer. What is the estimated client lifetime value of those individual accounts? Because a lot of accounts, as you know, the relationship survives over a long period of time. So what you want to focus on is the lifetime value of that account, not just the short-term gains. Do you know which accounts are most profitable in your organization? Are accounts categorized and reviewed in a systematic manner? Does the position or the role of an account manager exist within the organization? Do you consider your organization as a client-centric organization? Yeah, a lot of organizations kind of call themselves as being client-centric, but they don't respond very quickly to a client. I've seen this in a lot of different companies where people are interacting with the clients, and a client asks a question, and the person actually has got to go back to his company. He's got to go through several levels of approval before he can get back to the client. And obviously, that's not a good situation. So being responsive to the client, being empowered to make decisions and to guide the client is actually very, very important. If you have internal processes where you go back and you've got to seek approval for this and that, obviously that's going to slow down the entire process, and that's not necessarily what I would consider as a client-centric organization. So these are just a simple little test that I use, and if you can answer, say, 5 or 6, at least 5 or 6 of these questions, then I would say you probably have a very, very good handle on strategic account management. If you're only able to answer, maybe 3 or less, then I would say, look, there's a lot to be learned about strategic account management. If you couldn't answer any of these questions, you could be in the wrong kind of job. So I don't know about that, but this is a little test that I use. Okay, so actually a lot of these concepts that I talk about in this program is based on the work of a number of different people, but as a reference book, what I like is this book by Malcolm McDonald, who used to be a professor at University of Oxford. He's probably written the best book on key account management, he calls it, but he basically extracts a lot of the kind of theories and the frameworks and combines that with some of the practice there. On the program that I run, you do get a lot of ebooks as well, a lot of supporting material. So here's another question that I want to throw at you. How many companies can you name that manufacture commercial aircraft? You can type in your answers in the chat box if you know the answer. How many companies can you name that manufacture commercial aircraft? So Boeing, that's 1. Airbus, that's 2. Boeing, Airbus, Boeing. I got a Boeing. I presume that's a Boeing, yeah? A Boeing, okay. So somebody's saying Embraer and Lockheed. I don't know if Lockheed make commercial aircraft. Rolls-Royce, I think they make aircraft engines. I don't think they make aircraft itself. So basically, I'm getting Airbus and Boeing and maybe a few other companies. So why did I ask you that question? Yeah. Okay, so a lot of you said Boeing. A lot of you said Airbus. No one said Gulfstream. And there are a few other smaller players as well. Embraer, Bombardier, Shorts, Mitsubishi, they produce generally very, very small aircraft. But the people who make large aircraft, typically only two companies, Boeing and Airbus. Gulfstream is a manufacturer, but most of their planes are generally of a smaller size. But actually, my point is that, if you're in the aircraft business, if you're, for example, making aircraft parts, or you're doing maintenance, or you're doing any services around commercial aircraft, then there are only a very small handful of clients. Yeah, it's not as if there are hundreds of clients out there who could potentially use your business. There are 10, no more than 20 potential customers or clients there. So, your range of possible clients is actually very, very small. And here's another example from the pharmaceuticals industry. If you're in that business, if you're in that vertical, and you're looking for clients, well, again, there's only a relatively small set of clients that are going to give you a large quantity of business, and they're all on the slide here. Yeah. Now, obviously, there are a few firms in India. I know Cipla, for example, slightly smaller in size. But if you're in that industry, the point that I want to make is that if you want to grow and build yourself in a particular industry, then typically there's usually a very small handful of potential clients that you can go to. And I've seen this pattern already in engineering services. We do work with a couple of engineering firms. I see it in IT a lot. For example, I'm involved in a program with Tech Mahindra, and a lot of their clients are actually the big telco companies, but they generally have a very small set of clients. So the clients generate most of the revenue for the company. So it's actually very important for them to focus on these strategic accounts, and managing that portfolio is extremely important. Yeah. So sometimes the structure of an industry necessitates this very directed, very focused strategic account management approach. At the same time, the clients, the customers are basically having greater power. They're actually, getting bigger. They're getting more choosy. They're demanding more, and they're setting higher expectations. The other thing that clients are doing, they're rationalizing their supplier base. They don't want to deal with hundreds of different suppliers anymore. There's a problem managing too many suppliers. They actually want a smaller set of streamlined suppliers. In the IT industry, I saw this as well. Big companies that typically outsourced IT to maybe 30 or 40 different companies, they were saying, look, that's too hard to manage now. We're going to have a panel of maybe at most 6 or 7 trusted providers that we want to work with. Clients are also becoming a lot more sophisticated. They know the market, they know the providers, they know the pricing. All of that is, they have deep knowledge because they're in the industry. So, they're becoming a lot more sophisticated in their purchasing decisions. They also want tailor-made solutions. Yeah, they don't want generic off-the-shelf solutions anymore. And when we think about working with a client, it's always personalized and customized to their needs. Yeah, we see this a lot now, that having a generic solution typically doesn't interest bigger clients. And obviously, the cost of serving clients is increasing. Yeah, think about the business development teams. Think about the time that they need to spend with clients. Think about all the work that goes involved in building a relationship. Think about all the dinners and the coffees that you have with clients. Yeah, so actually, you can spend a lot of money on a client, and obviously, part of that is expecting a significant return on that investment in that particular relationship. So basically, clients are developing and becoming a lot more choosy. The other thing that they're looking for with suppliers is actually different ways of working, that are going to result in more of a win-win situation. So they don't want to simply buy from a client anymore. They want co-solutioning. They want to work with clients jointly on solutions. They want to jointly develop things, and they want to share knowledge at a much more intimate level. So, these are things which are happening on the client side. Just an example that I pulled out recently. I don't know if you came across this story, but it's basically Apple was kind of manufacturing this glass. I think it's called sapphire glass for its iPhones and its products. So basically, there's a company called GT Advanced Technologies that was a supplier. But because Apple actually has a lot of bargaining power, it was able to exert a lot of influence in terms of this relationship. And, it exerted so much influence that, it basically had a one-sided contract, very favorable towards Apple at a contractual level. And basically, this company, GT Advanced Technologies, Apple was the only client that was going to give them business of this scale. But because Apple was in such a strong position, it was able to dictate these terms. So it just kind of goes to highlight that, the balance of power in these relationships is actually very, very kind of important. And, understanding where you are in that relationship, how much power that you have, these are all important considerations when you're managing accounts. This is a bit of research that was carried out. I don't know if you've heard of the Pareto principle, but it's quite an interesting concept. Basically, what the research that was done, basically they found that typically in organizations, 80% of the profit that an organization has is derived from 20% of your client base, basically. And the rest of it is generated from other accounts which are less strategic in nature. So if you just look at a pyramid like this, you can see that you have some very important clients, your strategic accounts, and they generate most of your revenues or profit. And obviously, those are the people that you want to focus on. Whereas beyond that, there are there are a lot more smaller accounts, but collectively, they don't generate hardly enough profits or revenues. And consequently, obviously, you want to focus less attention on those and more on the strategic accounts. So I think this Pareto principle is something that happens in a lot of organizations. So the other concept that I want to introduce is this idea of business value pyramid. And when we talk about client relationships, I think there are different levels we have to appreciate, basically. So this pyramid illustrates those 4 different levels. At the bottom, you have the basic level, which is more of a transactional level, if you like. This is where there's no real deep relationship between the client and the provider. It's basically based on transaction alone. Think about if you go to a supermarket and you buy stuff at the supermarket, you take your stuff to the checkout counter, you pay for your goods, and then you go home. You don't try and build a relationship with the store manager or vice versa. None of that happens. It's basically a transactional kind of situation. Beyond that, there are more deeper levels. There's a preferred level where you may be a preferred provider. There may be a panel of providers, so you're one of those. Beyond that, there's a collaborative level where you're actually, as a supplier, you're bringing new ideas into the client's kind of business, into the client's domain. You're suggesting new directions. You're adding value to the client. That becomes a much more collaborative relationship. And then ultimately, at the strategic level, that's where the client's business is actually integrated with your own offering. So it's almost as if it's connected together. i.e. the client can't do without you, and conversely, you probably can't do without the client. There's basically a win-win there. So appreciate that there are these levels, and you don't go to the top level straight away. You go to the top level maybe after many years of working together, proving the relationship. So when you meet a client for the first time, typically it's going to be at the transactional level, and it will take you time to move up the business value pyramid. So the relationships always have a maturity, basically. Relationships have to mature. Just to give you an overview of strategic account management, this is the kind of framework that I like to use. There are three key elements here. One is business strategy, because this is connected with business strategy. If you think about your own organization, what is its business strategy? How does it approach business? Account management is closely tied to that. The other dimension that's important is process maturity. So how mature are your account management processes, basically? So somebody wants to annotate, not quite sure, but okay. So that's how mature your processes are. And then there's organizational change, because you might need to make changes within the organization to implement some of these processes. And then at the tip, you have basically your strategic account portfolio. So actually, there are a number of different steps in this process. This is not a sequential process. This is basically a cyclical process. First, you want to think about the strategic account portfolio. Second, you want to think about how to build relationships with your strategic accounts. You want to try and formulate very specific plans for a particular client. You want to manage your portfolio on an ongoing basis, and you want to make sure that the organization supports you in doing that, because you have an account-centric or a client-centric structure there. So that's basically the overarching framework that I like to use. This is the model that I actually use in my own program as well. One of the case studies that we talk about is Schneider Electric. This is a large provider of electronic components, billion-dollar company. Basically, if you look at their organizational structure, it kind of looks a bit like this. This is an excerpt from that case study. They basically have a concept of an international account manager, and each international account manager will typically manage a strategic account. And this could be a global client, basically. So it doesn't matter where that client is typically located. They could be dispersed to offices around the world. They typically assign someone called an international account manager to manage every single global strategic account that they have. And within certain countries, there are people called country correspondents, if you like. They kind of report through to the international account manager. Now, the other concept that's relevant here is SGBD, which is a strategic development board, strategic global business development. Basically, what they do as a body is basically they plan out the strategy of the accounts that they want to go after, and they review basically the current accounts that they have, and they actually manage the account portfolio using this particular body. The other aspect that is worth noting is that, when an international account manager needs support, maybe it's technical support, maybe it's marketing support, maybe they're involved in the solutioning phase where they're bidding for a project or they're trying to propose a new idea to a client. They can draw upon various industry experts within Schneider Electric. So that provides a lot of the technical support that an account manager needs. So actually, Schneider Electric have evolved their organizational structure for over many years. This is the structure that they use, and you can see how they organize themselves around their kind of most important accounts. Okay, so just show you this cartoon. Obviously, this is not a good example of an organization. It's not very client-centric, basically. They're more inward-looking. And, this is just something that you want to avoid. So, even though you might have very seasoned leaders and managers who know how to behave in front of clients and know how to respond in front of clients, maybe part of your business development team, are thinking differently and behave differently. So every touch point, where you have a touch point with a client or a potential client, obviously you have to behave and act in the right manner. So let's just go back to account management. What are strategic or key accounts? These are customers in a business-to-business market identified by the selling company as being of strategic importance to them. Yeah. So typically, your strategic accounts will generally have a high profit or a high profit potential over a long period of time. Yeah, that's what makes them important. And strategic account management is an integrated process for managing client relationships profitably. So this is just a basic kind of understanding of what these terms are. As I mentioned, when we get into account management, the focus is more relational than transactional. You're trying to build relationships. You're not trying to do transactions. So it's a relational focus rather than a transactional focus. So just a few quick questions here. Do you agree, yes or no? You just have to type in yes or no. I should please the client no matter what. Yes or no? I should please the client no matter what. Second question, I lose money with this client, but I should still continue working for them. Yes or no? Okay. So some yeses and some no's there. Interested? My best clients keep on giving us repeat business, so I can assume they are happy with us. Yes or no? Okay, so again, mix of yeses and no's. I should spend the same amount of time with each client so there is consistency in our quality of service. Yes or no? I think I have more no's there. I need to sell, so I should push my products and services to potential clients and talk about how good our company is. Is that the right approach? I need to sell. So I'm seeing a few yeses there. I'm seeing some no's. Okay. Basically, there are no right or wrong answers here. But if you if you have a good feel for account management and building relationships, you would have your own kind of answers to these questions. Just on that particular question, there is a school of thought that says, look, it's not a selling process. It's actually a buying process. So we sell. When we sell, we push our products to people. When we buy, we think more about the client's problems and the client's challenges and the client's needs. And therefore, we listen more to what they're saying. Whereas if you push, you do most of the talking. Whereas in a buying process, the client is doing most of the talking. So actually, you can see that there's a difference between the buying and selling perspective. So just kind of bear that in mind. So basically, account management skills are skills which will help you manage and maximize your business development efforts. They'll also enhance your strategic thinking skills because understanding client relationships is so important at multiple levels. Yeah, if you're into business development, it's obviously important. If you have a touch point with a client, it's obviously important. If you're a senior leader, it's it's important that you know how to work with clients. Yeah, so basically this competency cuts across lots of different levels, and it doesn't matter, if you're a leader of any kind, if you're a senior manager of any kind, strategic account management skills are going to be very, very useful to you. So as I mentioned, there's a fine kind of alignment here between business strategy and strategic account management. Basically, strategy, you can look at it as two parts. One is strategy formulation, and the second part is strategy execution. And basically, strategic account management helps an organization with the execution piece. So if you kind of draw a diagram like this, you have business strategy at the top, you have market strategy below that. Oops, too fast. Basically, that's about understanding the business. And then strategic account management kind of fits below that, which is understanding how to get the business. So, once you have your business strategy and your market strategy crafted out, you then want to focus on the market segments that you want to focus on. And within those market segments, you have your strategic accounts here. So this shows that there's a very strong alignment between strategic account management and business strategy. If you want to execute your business strategy, strategic account management is a good starting point for doing that. So what makes an account strategic in nature? I've already talked about the fact that it's a high profit or high profit potential. That's one of the important criteria. But there are other criteria as well that might be important. For example, image and status. If you have a very well-known client on your books, as a reference point, then that might serve as a lever to attract more clients. Yes, if you're working with, say, look, the biggest IT company in the world, or the biggest bank in the world, or the biggest pharmaceutical company in the world, if you have a reference point, that might give you, that might help your image and status. Also, innovation capacity. If you're working with a client and you're going to get an understanding of a particular domain, perhaps it's a domain or geography that you don't currently have much experience with, what that is going to do is actually help you innovate. You're going to get more experience and insight, and that's going to help you enhance your own innovation capability within the company. So that's another reason that you might consider. The other is obviously growth and growth potential. So again, if you have, say you have a fresh client in China, that means, once you have a reference point in China, then that might open up other doors for you in China because you have that reference client there. So actually, we talk about high profit and high profit potential, but there are other reasons why certain clients might be strategically important to you. So I hope that makes sense there. Xerox. So actually, Xerox is another good case study. Xerox, as you know, they make the photocopiers and the document management systems, multi-billion-dollar company. They basically had a global account management program where they reduced what they called their tier 1 accounts from 100 to 25. And they did that in order to maintain a much more stronger focus on the client. They basically used 3 criteria to basically do that. They said, if we're going to serve, if a client is going to become a tier 1 account for us, number 1, the company itself must be global and have operations in at least two regions, with a substantial part of its business outside its home market. So that means it's a global company, it's a global client with operations in multiple areas. Also, the company size is considered both in terms of existing and potential business, yeah. So even if you have a very large client, you may only be getting a small piece of their business, a small piece of their pie. So if you're not getting a big piece of their pie, or there's no potential to get a big piece of the pie, it's very hard for them to be considered a tier one account. And actually, the other thing is that the company or the client itself must also, have processes around global procurement and be willing to work with Xerox in this kind of way. So it's a kind of two-way relationship, yeah. The client has to be willing to invest in you as a potential global provider as well. So it's got to be a win-win kind of relationship. So this is how Xerox kind of defined its global account management program. Again, very much a streamlined approach, trying to develop deeper relationships with its key strategic accounts. So I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this funnel. It's called the sales funnel. You basically have lots of leads and they become contacts, and then they become suspects and prospects, opportunities, and then eventually, so the sales funnel gets smaller as you work your way down. I'm sure if you're in business development, you're familiar with this. I prefer this. This is what people tend to use when they talk about account management. They talk about the account portfolio, basically. And this little matrix, I think, is a very good way to map out your own accounts. Yeah. So you have two axes here. One is client attractiveness from a supplier perspective. The other is supplier attractiveness from a client perspective. So basically, a strategic account is one where the client is attracted to you as a supplier, and you as a supplier are attracted to them. That's what makes it strategic. It's a win-win. Yeah. Then you have accounts which are developmental in nature. So basically, they're attractive to you as a supplier, but the client isn't really convinced yet. So there's some work, there's developmental work, the investment that you got to do there. You aren't quite ready at the level that you want to be. So development has to take place. Then there are things which I call opportunistic accounts, which are generally, they may lead to something, they may not, they may fall away by the wayside. They're basically, it's where, supplier doesn't see you as very attractive and you don't see the supplier as very attractive. So there's no real point spending a lot of time and effort on those accounts. And then there are the maintenance accounts where client sees you as very, very attractive, but you're not so attractive to the client. So maybe it's a client you've been working with for a long period of time, where maybe initially the margins were very, very good, but maybe over the years the margins have reduced significantly. So, there's a question mark. Look, what you do. Someone who's loyal, someone who you've been working with for a long time, but the performance, the business outcomes, the revenues isn't as high as it was. So it becomes more of a maintenance. You're in a maintenance mode there. So that's a matrix that I think is quite useful. Just another case study with Philips. I'm sure you know Philips. They make all these various electronic digital products, light bulbs, whatever it is. They're basically in that space. They also adopted strategic account management. They also found that in terms of their top accounts, their clients, they were having a lot more pressure from them, and they realized that they couldn't serve every of their clients in the same way. They basically wanted to serve their most profitable clients better. And challenges, they didn't even know the profitability of their particular accounts. So that was, they were basically starting from scratch. They had no concept of account management, proper account management at Philips, and they realized this. So that's why they put in place strategic account management. So actually, if you look at now the structure of Philips, this is probably similar to some other organizations, but basically they have three dimensions. One is their product dimension. So they have their lighting, they have their consumer products, they have their medical systems. This is a product categorization. Then they have their regional categorization. So this is where they split it by geography. So they have their Asia Pacific, they have their Latin America, they have their Europe and Africa. So that's the second dimension. But what they've introduced is a third dimension, so how they structure themselves as an organization. And this is basically by kind of accounts based on industry segments and customer groups. So they have their retail, they have their wholesale, they have their hotels, hospitals, etc. And within those different industry segments, they have their key strategic accounts, basically. Especially, you can see that, they've added this extra dimension, and this is very much because of their global account management program. Now, this is another view, basically, of how they organize their accounts. The top right-hand corner, those are what they call their key accounts, global key accounts. So some very big names there, the Walmarts, the Tesco's, the Carrefours. Obviously, those are the accounts that they're going to spend a lot of time on and have dedicated account managers looking after. At the second tier, they have what they call regional key accounts. So these are very much within a particular geographical region. They have a few accounts there. And then they have their local key accounts, where this is really the third tier, and less emphasis on these particular accounts. But basically, that's how they do their matrix. Yeah, a slight variation from the matrix that I showed earlier, but essentially the same philosophy here, focusing on the level of partnership and the level of performance there. Yeah. Okay, actually, I'm kind of towards the end of my session, and just to kind of summarize some of the concepts that I've covered. As I said, the structure of various industries these days, and the way the portfolio of clients is evolving, a lot more clients getting a lot more bargaining power, getting a lot stronger, and the need for you to really kind of respond to that with a more focused approach in terms of how you manage those relationships and how you select your clients. I talked about the Pareto principle. So go back to your own organization, think about this, think about the top 10 accounts, and see what proportion of your profits or revenue are derived from that top 10. I'm pretty sure you're going to be consistent with the Pareto principle here. The third aspect is, SAM is a process, but it's also part of culture. Yeah. So being a client-centric organization is not just about having processes in place. It's about the people and how you behave and how you act. So there are very much cultural implications here. And, everyone knows that culture is difficult to change, requires a lot of kind of leadership effort. But basically, SAM is a process, but it's also about culture here. I talked about strategic accounts and what we define as a strategic account. I talked about high profit or high profit potential. That's typically the goal, basically. It doesn't make sense for you to spend energy on the accounts which are of low value. You really would be spending the effort in the wrong way. All companies have finite resources. Yeah, you have finite people, so why not spend your time and effort on the accounts that really matter more to you as an organization? I've also talked about the alignment between business strategy and strategic account management. You can see that there's a very strong connection there. There's a very strong interplay between the two here, and I think that's important to bear in mind. People like to talk about strategy, and they like to draw these nice diagrams on the wall and, think about it. But, you can't execute strategy unless you have a good handle on the clients, and you gotta go out there and talk to clients and engage with them. And there's a lot of discipline in building relationships with the client and the stakeholders. There are multiple people that you have to build relationships with within any organization. It's not one single person. So, understanding that is obviously important. Interpersonal skills are very, very important. Listening skills are also very, very important. So, there is a close alignment there with business strategy. And I'll kind of encourage you to move away from a sales funnel more to an account portfolio management set of practices. I think this is a better way, particularly in a B2B space. People don't talk a lot about B2B, business to business. If you go on a marketing course on an MBA program, they'll typically talk about B2C, business to consumer. Whereas if you're in a service-based organization, like an IT firm, like a consulting firm, like an auditing firm, like an engineering services firm, you're typically focused on delivering services, and most of that typically happens in a B2B space. So moving away from a traditional sales funnel more to an account portfolio is the way to go there. So basically, that's the end of the webinar session. I hope that was useful to you. Hope it's given you some insight into some of the concepts around strategic account management. As I mentioned, a lot of you probably have a lot of experience in this area, and I hope that you can connect with some of the concepts that I talked about in this particular webinar session. In the program that I run, we actually go into a few case studies. These are the same case studies that any reputable business school would use. We use some Harvard case studies as well. Basically, giving you examples of how other companies have implemented account management, and we get to share some of our own experiences there. So that's how we basically conduct the program. So I'll take any questions if there are any. I'll just give you a minute or two to ask questions. I think the best way to ask a question is actually to type your question in the chat box, and I will respond to it. Do you want to get the present? Yes, of course, you can get the presentation deck if you wish. I think there'll be a recording. I think they'll make the recording available as well. Maybe you can share the recording also with people in your own organization. That's fine. So just checking to see if there are any questions. Any questions about the content? Any issues that you face in the workplace? Any observations or any input that you want to make based on your own experience? Please feel free to do so. Question there: is it possible to grow an account over time to make it a strategic account? Oh yes. Definitely. I don't think you can acquire a strategic account from day one. I think in general you have to build trust, show a track record of successful working and collaboration, and then I think it morphs into a strategic account. A lot of clients don't want to jump in to strategic relationships straight away. They basically want to take time to kind of build up to that. I guess it's like getting married, yeah. You don't suddenly meet a girl, in my case, you don't suddenly meet a girl and say, hey, let's get married tomorrow. She becomes a friend, she becomes a girlfriend, you go dating for maybe a few years, and then you decide to get married. So I guess the concept is somewhere there, yeah. Same strategic applicable to manufacturing, yeah. Of course, if you look at Nike, for example, they choose their manufacturing partners very, very carefully. The same with Apple. Apple built a relationship with a provider, which is the Chinese company that manufactures all the iPhones, etc. That is a strategic relationship. Apple doesn't have hundreds of different manufacturers. It actually, deals essentially with that one company to manufacture most of its products. Actually, there's an interesting thing here because Samsung, which is also a competitor to Apple, actually is also a key provider to Apple. There was a story when Apple was launching I think it was the iPad or the second version of the iPad. They tried to move away from Samsung, and they tried to go with another company. I think it was LG or someone else, or was it Sharp? And basically, they weren't able to produce to the volumes that Apple wanted, and they had to go back to Samsung. So actually, Samsung is a strategic partner of Apple, even though in a different kind of area, they're fierce competitors here. Okay, is SAM processes applicable in the education industry? Possibly. I don't know too much about the educational organization that you're part of. But yeah, if you have certain, providers that you work with on the education side, maybe a learning platform provider, whatever, yes, these concepts are certainly useful. I'm sure as an educational institution, you'll have other providers that will want to work with you in a variety of different ways, IT or HR or accounting or whatever. So this question there, some clients offer you strategic partnerships and participate in selling your products. Is this right or should be avoided? I think you got to look at every kind of relationships on a case-by-case basis and evaluate the strategic merits. I know in the IT sector, for example, companies might have, say if you're a Tech Mahindra, which is one of the people that we work with. Tech Mahindra, obviously a large provider of IT services. They don't have products themselves, but they partner with people like SAP, the big ERP supplier. And what they do is they do SAP work based around that SAP product, even though they don't own that product. Yeah. So they have a strategic partnership with SAP. I think there's a value to that kind of partnership, basically. But there's no hard and fast rule there. I think you got to look at strategic partnerships on a case-by-case basis. Yeah. Okay, good. I don't see any more new questions, and I think our time is up. So thanks everyone for attending the session today. Appreciate it, and I hope that the session was useful, giving you some good insights into the world of strategic account management. So thanks everyone, and bye from me. Thank you.